Okay.
Hello there. Very good morning and welcome to your morning update from the People's Progressive Party Civic. I'm your host, Eddy Layne. I'm joined this morning by former Attorney General Anil Nandlall and former Member of Parliament Joe Hamilton. Anil, Joe, good morning and welcome to the
Hi, Eddy. Good morning. Good morning to your viewers.
Good morning.
Nandlall, good morning.
Morning, Joe. Good morning. Pulauri, Joe.
So what I want to do, Anil, I want to start with you. This morning, the Chief Justice had a case management conference with regards to the matter filed by one Mr. Jones on behalf, trying to block GECOM from moving ahead with its declaration with regards to using the recount data. If you can break down what transpired this morning for our viewers before we move into the other issues.
Thank you, Eddy. And before we get to that, you would recall we spoke last night on one of these programs, and we made reference to a statement issued by the Office of the President, where Mr. Granger took umbrage to my description of him as a sanctimonious gangster. And in his response, he gave us his platitudinal regurgitation of compliance with the Constitution, etc., etc. And I said on the program last night with you that you will see this morning, in that statement, he attempted to distance himself from interfering with the works of GECOM. And he, tell us how GECOM is an independent body and he will always abide by the declarations of GECOM and so on. All of that, those platitudes, we heard it once again. And then this morning, I told you that the usual suspects will appear. Mayor Robertson would be joined by Roysdale Ford, that the Attorney General will suddenly appear, that the constellation from Trinidad will join the team. So this is all over another APNU application. So again, only yesterday, the day before his birthday, the president lied to the nation. And we saw that very clearly this morning. But this morning, you heard the Chief Justice. First thing, she took appearances from the persons representing the various parties named in the proceedings. So we had Messenger Jones, lawyer, entering appearance, lawyers. And of course, those persons that I made reference to are all now part of the team representing Messenger Jones. I'm told that this is a young lady who used to transport the ballot boxes from the back of the convention center into the counting stations. But this lady got a tremendous amount of wealth to retain 3 lawyers here and 3 in Trinidad. At some point in time, we have to get the anti-money laundering team and the GRA team to investigate these persons. The first one was Yulita Moore. And then we had the lady David, and now Miss Jones, because these are persons who are unknown. As far as we are aware, they are of humble earning, but they are able to hire a huge array of lawyers from within Guyana and overseas. So that will be a conversation at some point in time. So we had, and of course, the Attorney General appeared. We had Mr. Boston has returned. So Mr. Lowenfield is defending this case. So it will be interesting to see what Mr. Lowenfield, what position he will take. So Boston is appearing for him. And the chairperson has retained the services of her usual lawyer, Kim Kite. And then we had a host of applications from political parties who participated or that participated in the elections, making applications to join. We had an application from Bharat Jagdeo in his capacity as General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party. And we had that application of Mr. Jagdeo was joined with the application by Irfan Ali, the president-elect. Clearly, they have a very profound interest in the outcome of the proceedings. And then you had the other political party, Mr. Kashir Khan, appearing for, I can't remember the name, but Vishnu Bandu is represented by Datuddin and Ali, Jamila Ali. Ralph Ramkaran represents Mr. Schuman's party. I have the appearances here. Let me read them quickly. TCI and Change Guyana, represented by Kashir and Mohammed Khan. Anug, represented by Kamal Ramkaran. The New Movement, Josh Kanai, represented by Timothy Jonas. Vishnu Bandu, the United Republican Party, represented by Sanjeev Datuddin, Stephen Singh, and Jamila Ali. And Lennox Schumann, Liberty and Justice Party, represented by Hari Narayan Ramkaran. So all those appearances were entered, and then the Chief Justice gave some very strict and rigid timelines for submissions to be put to the court. But before we get there, she identified certain issues that she considered relevant for the lawyers to address, and then she gave directions on how submissions are going to be received. The applicant is to make their submissions by 11 p.m. tonight, and all the respondents are to submit by 10 p.m. tomorrow night, and any affidavits, etc., must be filed before the end of today. And the matter is fixed, I think she said, Friday at 2 p.m. for oral hearings to begin. Each of the various respondents have been given 15 minutes each, and the applicant, I believe, was given 20 minutes. So that, in a nutshell, is what transpired. I believe an undertaking, at least the Chief Justice interpreted it as an undertaking, though it was not expressed in that way in my respectful view. The Chief Justice interpreted certain sentiments expressed by Kim Kite to be in the form of an undertaking that they will know GECOM will not proceed with any decision or declaration that may frustrate or defeat the existing legal proceedings. So in short, that is what transpired this morning.
Thanks, Anil. And I think that covers basically where we are with regards to the court. But I want us to venture into a few other issues. And we have been talking, both Joe and Anil, we've been talking repeatedly about the consequences for those who ever attempt to thwart the will of the people, to suppress democracy, those who are inclined to become dictators. There are serious consequences, not only locally, but globally. Locally, maybe the electorate will turn away from you, those who you think to be your loyal supporters. But what we have some very, very important and breaking news this morning with regards to the actions of the Granger cabal. What I'll do, I'll first play this short video from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo before we get into some discussions, and I'm going to bring you in after that, Joe. So let's first go with this short video, and then we come back and have some discussions.
A little closer to home. Today I'm announcing visa restrictions on individuals responsible for or complicit in undermining democracy in Guyana. Immediate family members of such persons may also be subject to restrictions. The Granger government must respect the results of democratic elections and step aside. A little closer to home. Today
So I bring you in here first, Joe, before I go back to Anil. This is what came out from the U.S. government, from the Secretary of State. Some serious restrictions there.
Well, three things I gather from what the Secretary of State said. One, the persons who are responsible for undermining democracy, the cabal and Granger and their family will suffer visa restriction sanctions. And he indicated also the aiders and abettors also would suffer likewise, and that the likes of the Brian Tiwaris and I suspect those some in the media and in the legal fraternity and wherever they reside or wherever they operate, they will suffer the same. And thirdly is that the American government, through its Secretary of State, is calling on the Granger government to step aside. And so those are the three important elements. Oh, you will recall that some weeks ago, and I think Anil had mentioned it, Ram Jatan was on a radio station in Trinidad, where he basically suggested to the interview that the Americans and whoever, they were bluffing, because he basically said these threats of sanctions, you know, he saw them just as threats. But the fact is, we have moved today, at least, beyond threats. I suspect that the American government and the other countries and the organization, they really thought that by Monday afternoon, we would have had a declaration and a move to swear in President-elect Irfan Ali. I suspect they really thought so, like all Guyanese, because we thought that Saturday, after the clear instructions given to Loinfield by the chair, Monday, this meeting would have reported that he submitted the declarations from the recount, and therefore the man who is deemed president based on 233,000 odd votes, the instrument would be prepared for him to be sworn in. But everyone was disappointed, and therefore we moved to another stage. And no more, based on the Secretary of State language, they don't blame GECOM. They have put everything that is happening at the moment at the feet of David Granger, and therefore they are saying, you are an impediment and you must step aside and allow for the new government to be installed. That is where we're at, and I suspect before the days has ended, you would see the other countries, the British, the Canadians, and the European, and so indicating the same, because normally that is how these things go. Once the Americans start the ball bowling, you would see the other governments also indicating the same. So I am predicting that by this evening, we will have more actors, international actors, issuing the same type of restrictions on the Granger cabal.
Anil, I bring you in here. I think we spoke briefly about this last night. You alluded to the fact that these are some of the implications.
Last night, Eddy, I lamented emphatically on the fact that these sanctions were promised and they were not forthcoming, and that persons were beginning to lose confidence in these promises that were being made without them being any implementation. And then on the other hand, the miscreants were becoming even bolder because of the non-implementation of these promises. And I made that strident appeal last night for the sanctions to come now. Perhaps Mr. Pompeo listened to us, for all you know, because already this morning, he delivered on his long promise. No one can be surprised. These sanctions were in the making a long time ago and were long overdue. And those against whom they are imposed well deserve it. They earned it. We can't be envious of that. You know, these people have worked hard to get these things imposed upon them. I have never seen persons work so dedicatedly and so determinedly to have their visas revoked. How can you deny them that privilege? Let them enjoy this moment. Let them enjoy this moment. They work tirelessly for it. Look, when you look at what we have been saying over and over again. You know, people call me in America, they say, Anil, sometimes you don't fed up talking the same thing. We have been saying all the time that we live in a global village, that the world has changed. Authoritarianism, political dictatorship, violation of the rule of law, trampling upon doctrines of democracy will not be tolerated in this hemisphere anymore. That sanctions will come personally and they will come nationally. And, you know, the supporters of APNU, the leaders, because the sanctions were a little late, they started to poke fun at the people. They started to hurl abuses. Look at the level of vilification, vitriol, and abuse that they have hurled at these diplomats and these international agencies, making racial allegations against them, taking insular position, chasing them out of our country, pleading sovereignty, you know, all these things just because they're not getting their way to steal the government and rig an election. So, Eddy, these sanctions were long overdue, and they are going to come in this manner. I have no doubt that this is not the complete package. I mean, these people work hard and deserve far more than mere visa restrictions. And I like how the Americans call it, visa restrictions, traveling restrictions. So I agree with Joe. These countries normally act in alphabetical order. So the Americans go first, they're the A. The B will come second, C, and then the D. That's how they normally do it. So you will expect that to unfold. And hopefully, it doesn't, it can have two consequences. One of two consequences. One, it can bring these people who are on a path towards madness back to reality and to their senses, or it can drive them further down the road to insanity. We will have to wait and see the impact. But normally, the greater the wrong, the greater the wrong, the greater the punishment. So let us see if travel restrictions do not achieve the objective, and then they will have to take it to the other step, which will involve the freezing of assets and bank accounts, and then confiscation of assets, and finally perhaps physical invasion. Because these are the types of steps that are available to the international community. You would recall, I don't think a lot of people appreciate the magnitude of this matter being now at the Permanent Council of the OAS and the Permanent Council of the United Nations. When it reaches those levels in these organizations, it is at that place where you take the most extreme measures available under the international conventions that we have signed on to. So Guyana can't complain. When you sign on to these international treaties, under international law and under the Committee of Nations, you sign and you pledge to bind yourselves. So when they start to activate against you, there is no place to run. And I believe the last place that they took the extreme measure in was in Bolivia, when they sent a notice, get out, behave or get out, something like that, within 48 hours, or we will come for you. And they came for him. So those who are listening to us and who may be precariously in this conundrum that they have placed themselves in would be well advised to look at the array of sanctions that would normally come post travel restrictions, so that they can understand and appreciate the dangers to which they are exposed, if they care. I have to say though, as a Guyanese and as a human being, that I feel for their families. Every time I speak on any of these programs, I lament what these people are doing to their families. Some of their family members may be behind them, but I know that there are family members who are not in support of the vulgarities and the illegalities that these people have been engaged in. And those are the family members who will have to face the consequences, including children who may be at universities overseas, including the United States, and may have to terminate their scholarships and their studies, waste a lot of money and waste a lot of sacrifices and come back here, be sent back here, and they may not have even approved what these miscreants here have been doing. But so be it. They were warned. Look at the length of time that they were given, and they still persisted. So if they don't care for their own family and they are prepared to expose their own family to this kind of sanctions, well, then who are we? Who are we to say anything about it?
But Anil, I may share a little bit of a different view from you with regards to family members. While I understand what you're saying, and I don't know how you stand on this, Joe, but all these persons who may be affected have been silent for the past 4 months, save and except a few of them. The only relative that I've seen coming out is Mr. Gaskin, the son-in-law of David Granger. All the others sat silently and accepted it. We haven't seen the First Lady basically endorsing the position taken by Mr. Granger. So they too are complicit in this process. What are your thoughts, Joe?
No, in that regard, I agree with you. Whilst I am sympathetic in some regard based on the point Anil raised. Well, somewhere in the scriptures it records about the sins of the father is going to fall on the generations, and therefore that's what we have. And whilst I can understand what Anil is saying, the fact is, most, if not all of these people are adults. They're not minors, and they have a mouth and a voice. And if they don't want to be bundled up as a miscreant like their parents, then they should have spoken up and out. They had enough time. So that is how I would see it. You had your opportunity, like Gaskin did, to speak. And it takes a lot of courage to come out and speaking that way about your father-in-law, basically. I suspect over the years, Gaskin might have had great reverence and respect for this man, but he's forced to reconsider whether it's the same man that I knew over decades. And he sought to speak on this matter. Importantly, the fact that Gaskin spoke, it must mean that this was a matter discussed within the family, So the pain and suffering on the earth will come, and I would say that, as Anil said, if the parents, they don't care a damn, who are we to care? For their children and grandchildren, who are we to care? The other point is, this this thing is gradual, visa restrictions, then as Anil said, it deals with issued assets. I recall going back, I think sometime in the 90s, and I think Anil, you would recall this, another General Noriega in Panama. You remember him? He was asked, just like Granger is asked, by the Americans to step aside. And he refused to step aside. He pleaded the same sovereignty. I recall his last public showing. He had a cutlass or a, whatever you want to call it, a sword.
Machete.
A machete lashing up on a podium and talking about how he will defend the fatherland and the motherland. You know? And in a matter of hours, it was over. And he ended up spending 3 life sentences in different jurisdictions. He went off to Miami first. And when he was finished, he went to France. And then he was brought back to Panama to serve the last life sentence. So those are the precedents of people who think that sanctions, the threat of sanctions is just a threat. Noriega thought it was just, and let me say this, historically, Noriega was a very close ally and friend of the United States. It is said that he was even indoctrinated and worked for the CIA. But when it came to the time for the Americans to act, when he was advised to step aside, he refused to step aside, and he pleaded the same conversation these people are having here about sovereignty. And we know what the end of that was. You know, Peter Wickham, I think night before the last on your Mahadio program, he said a very important thing. He said there is no sovereignty unless there is legitimacy. So unless you're legitimate in the eyes of the international community, the conversation about you're a sovereign nation, it is just a conversation. And he points to the fact that any new country, like we have seen not so long ago, South Sudan, when they determined to establish a state and Eritrea, it is the United Nations that had to determine their legitimacy before they could have said they're a sovereign nation. And the point Anil raised earlier, that this is a global village, and you have signed on and you have given undertaking that pin you to human rights and democracy and the rule of law. And when you break them, the world will act. The world must act. Because let us assume, if Granger is allowed to continue with this foolishness, August, Trinidad got elections. After the elections is finished, and UNC, if they win it, Rowley could determine, you know, like Granger, and what will the world say? When Rowley take position like Granger don't want to give up government, Rowley can point to the fact that you all did nothing with Guyana, so why you come fatiguing me? And therefore, the world will not allow this to happen, because this can have repercussions and a domino effect in different countries as we go along.
Thank you very much, Joe. Your closing comments, Anil, as we wrap this up.
Well, I still, Eddie, every time I listen to or I participate in one of these programs and I hear it from another voice, I keep saying it too, but every time I hear it, like how I heard it from Joe Hamilton just now, I cannot fathom and process in my head and in my mind how these guys persuaded themselves that they can pull this thing off. If at some point in time I got to get onto one of them, I know many of them personally, and Joe, you and I will have to sit down one day with one of these, one of the intellectual authors.
They're just interjecting their medical technology now that you can do brain scans.
I want them to tell me how they had planned to pull this thing off. You know, I want to know, you know, if they really think. Like I look at the lawyers just now, that grouping of lawyers. What those fellas telling themselves? They are going to a court to say, listen, judge, and this is the Chief Justice of the country. A court of law, the judiciary, is established in a society to advance the law, to protect the Constitution, to ensure that people do not violate the law. This grouping of people, they want to thief an election, they want to thief a government, but the chairperson preventing them from doing that. Because they got the acolyte, Mingo and Lowenfield, and they get them to pervert themselves. But they can't pass the commission. There's a filter there. Every day they're going to get it pushed back. So they say, look, we got to take a serious position. Let us go to the court to complain. And this is the place that is to protect and uphold the law. Let us go to the court to complain that they're not allowing us to thief the government and thief the election. And they're bringing 3 lawyers from Trinidad to help them convince the court. And I see my friend Boston there. He will argue that Lowenfield must be allowed to prepare a report that doesn't reflect the election results. That Lowenfield has that power. That's what Boston, I believe, will plan to argue. You want to know how wide is this net? How many mad people are covered and caught in this net?
It's getting wider every day.
But let me close by telling you that Joe spoke at length about sovereignty. And sovereignty is not a loose term, you know. Sovereignty is a legal concept. This is our constitution. Our constitution says at Article 9, sovereignty belongs to the people. So let's pause there. Sovereignty belongs to any political party. It belongs to the people of Guyana. All the people, not one set. And it goes on. Who exercise it through their representatives and the democratic organs established by or under this constitution. Full stop. Now, take this provision of the Constitution and put it into practice. Sovereignty belongs to the people who exercise it through their representatives. The people of Guyana went to the polls on March the 2nd. The people of Guyana elected their representatives by casting a ballot. And they did so by utilizing the democratic organs, meaning the electoral process established by this constitution. These people who are pleading sovereignty, therefore, are the ones who are defying sovereignty. Because they are defying the will of the people, the exercise of that will of the people to elect their representatives through democratic organs of the Constitution. So it's not the foreigners that they are accusing of violating Guyana's sovereignty. It's they are violating Guyana's sovereignty because they don't know better. They don't know better. So I will end with that note, and I will also say that I hope that the second round of sanctions do not take as long as the first round to be forthcoming.
Anil, thanks, Joe. Thanks for joining me this morning. To our viewers, we want to say thanks for being part of the program. We're going to be back with you a little later in the day with another update. Until then, we say thanks for watching and have a safe rest of the day.